I still remember the night like it was yesterday, the kind of night that sticks in your chest, gnaws at you, and refuses to let go. It was November 14th, 2021, in our tiny two-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas. The street outside was quiet, the usual hum of traffic long gone, leaving just the occasional bark of a dog or the distant wail of a siren. I was sitting on the living room couch, nursing a half-empty bottle of craft beer I'd grabbed on the way home from work. My laptop sat on the coffee table, half ignored, because my mind kept wandering back to the buzzing phone sitting on the armrest next to me. Her name is Emily, my wife. Though at that moment, I wasn't sure who she really was anymore. She was 29, a bright, ambitious woman with a laugh that could fill a room and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. When I first met her in 2016 at a marketing conference in Dallas, she was the reason I'd stayed longer than I should have. She had this energy that pulled people in, and me, stubborn and skeptical, had fallen headfirst. I remember thinking at the time that I'd never been more sure of anything in my life, of course. I'd end up with her. Our marriage had been solid on the surface. We had a small life that felt comfortable. I worked as a software engineer at a mid-sized startup. She was climbing the ladder at a boutique advertising agency downtown. We had our routines: Thursday night taco runs from Torchy's Tacos, lazy Sunday mornings at Barton Springs, cooking together while loud indie playlists filled the apartment. I thought I knew her. I wanted to believe I did, but small things had started creeping in over the past few months. Little red flags I'd brushed off. The subtle tension when she picked up her phone in a hurry, the sudden, vague excuses for being late at the office, and the tiny gaps in her stories that I tried not to notice. I told myself it was normal. Everyone needs a little space, a little mystery, but deep down, a tiny seed of unease had been planted. That night, the unease was suffocating. The apartment was dimly lit, a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls, and I could hear her voice on the phone. It wasn't a loud conversation. She was careful, almost rehearsed, but I caught fragments of it, laughter, a pause. It's the kind of intonation you hear when someone is flirting without words. My heart was pounding, my stomach twisting into knots. I had a strange, sick feeling in my chest that I tried to push aside. It was around 11:37 p.m. when her phone buzzed again. I watched as she glanced at it, her fingers brushing over the screen. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Hey, just got home." "Yeah, I'm tired too," she said softly, voice lower than usual. My stomach sank. Okay. Talk tomorrow." She ended the call, slipped the phone under her pillow, climbed into bed next to me. I should have dropped it then. I should have let it go, but I didn't. Instead, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail in my mind. Something wasn't right. Something didn't add up. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that my own fears were betraying me before anything had actually happened. But there was a knot in my gut I couldn't ignore. Our life before this moment had felt predictable, even comforting. We had our little quirks. Emily had a habit of reorganizing the spice rack every Thursday, insisting that the cayenne and paprika needed spatial balance. I would tease her about it. She'd laugh, eyes sparkling. We had Sunday brunches at that tiny French cafe on South Congress, and during those moments, I could forget the stress of work, the emails, the bills. I could forget everything except her smile. That made this gnawing doubt feel even worse, because it was like watching a part of your reality fracture in real time, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way she would lock her phone screen as soon as I walked into the room, the late nights at the office that didn't always seem plausible, the subtle defensiveness when I asked simple questions about her day. I hated that I was thinking like this. I hated that a voice inside my head had shifted from trust to suspicion. But once the seed was planted, it grew faster than I could control. The following week was a blur of unease and paranoia. November in Austin is usually mild, with crisp nights and the faint scent of rain on the pavement. But to me, it felt cold, almost oppressive. Every time her phone rang, my stomach would drop. I found myself checking her notifications when she left the room, telling myself I was just trying to understand, and then I saw it a number saved as Coworker, but unfamiliar. Multiple late-night calls logged. Timestamps, showing 11 p.m., 12:30 a.m., sometimes even 1 a.m. The text messages were brief, seemingly innocent at first glance. But there was a pattern to them that set off every alarm in my mind. Hey, did you get home okay? Here, I missed you today there. I spent that night sitting on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through the messages over and over. I could feel the apartment breathing around me, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the wall clock. It's the faint smell of the takeout we had for dinner hours ago. I felt like a stranger in my own life. How had things come to this? When did the woman I married become someone I barely recognized? The more I looked, the more I started remembering small moments I'd shrugged off before. The way she would blush when she received certain texts. How she sometimes held the phone closer to her chest when we were together, the casual secrecy in her tone. I could hear my own thoughts echoing in my head. You're overthinking. You're imagining things. Maybe she's just stressed. Maybe she really is busy. But the evidence was piling up, undeniable, and my gut told me it was more than just stress. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the floor beneath me had given way. I had loved her with everything I had. I had trusted her in ways I hadn't trusted anyone else. And yet here I was, questioning everything. My mind ran through every conversation we'd had, every laugh we'd shared, every mundane moment that now seemed loaded with meaning I hadn't understood at the time. It was like rewinding a movie and noticing all the tiny clues you missed the first time. And the worst part? I couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop thinking, couldn't stop wondering what I had missed and what I was about to discover. That's how it all started. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a shouting match or a door slammed in anger. It started quietly in the dead of night, the small phone buzzing on the edge of the bed, and a sinking feeling in my chest that something had changed forever. And in that moment, I realized life as I knew it wasn't going to be the same again. I was about to find out that trust, once broken, leaves cracks that only get bigger over time. I didn't know it then, but the next few weeks would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the person I thought I had married. And looking back now, I can see the foreshadowing, everywhere the tiny, almost invisible signs that I had chosen to ignore. But at the time, I just sat there, frozen, staring at her sleeping form next to me, wondering how someone who could smile like that could also keep secrets so deep, so deliberate that they could destroy a life in ways you never imagined. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of the night pressing down on me, heavy and relentless. Emily was already gone, her side of the bed cold, the sheets slightly rumpled from where she had slept. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and toast, a lingering scent from our breakfast ritual she had clearly already finished. I had this odd sense of dread, that quiet, sickly feeling that tightens in your chest when something is about to break. But you can't yet see the pieces. I tried to convince myself to carry on, to treat it like any other day. Work emails, meetings, a Zoom call at 10 a.m. with the team normal life had to continue. But every glance at her side of the bed, the pillows still imprinted with the shape of her head, made it impossible. My mind kept going back to the late-night calls, the coworker messages, the laughter I had overheard that I shouldn't have. The knot in my stomach had grown into something more, something malignant. It wasn't until I was on my lunch break that the breaking point arrived. I was scrolling through my phone absently, trying to distract myself with work emails and memes my friends had sent, when I saw a notification pop up. It was from Emily's email synced to the same account we shared for bills and occasional calendar updates. I almost ignored it, till I realized the subject line was innocuous. Project update call notes, but something about it made me pause. I hesitated, then clicked. The email was filled with notes. Yes, but they weren't about any project I recognized. Names of clients and campaigns that didn't exist at her agency. And then there was a line that made my stomach drop. Had a great time last night. Can't wait to see you again. My fingers froze over my phone. I reread it. And then again. And again. The coworker wasn't a coworker at all. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I couldn't breathe. My hand shook as I scrolled, desperately looking for context, anything that would make it make sense. But the more I read, the more the illusion of my marriage unraveled. Flirtatious messages, secret dinner meets, casual mentions of trips I had never known about. Everything I thought was safe, every laugh, every quiet Sunday morning, suddenly felt like it had been a performance, and I had been nothing more than an audience. That night, when Emily came home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. My mind was a storm of betrayal and confusion, my heart a fragile, rattling thing. I tried to ask to confront her gently at first. "Emily, I saw the email," I said, voice barely steady, my fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen counter like I could hold myself together through sheer force. She froze. Just for a moment, and I saw my first clear sign of guilt. Her eyes flicked down, a micro-expression that anyone trained in human behavior would recognize instantly. I should have noticed it sooner. I should have known. But love blinds you, doesn't it? She tried to brush it off, her words calm, rehearsed, the kind of practiced denial that cuts deeper than screaming. But my brain wasn't hearing her. All I could see was the truth in the little tells, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the hushed tones. Every memory of her I had cherished suddenly carried a weight of deception. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed later that night, phone in hand, staring at the screen that had betrayed her. I couldn't stop the shaking. My thoughts raced. How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional, or had it been physical too? Was everything I knew about us a lie? I felt a strange mix of anger and heartbreak, a cocktail of emotions that made me nauseous. Sleep didn't come. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the clock ticking inexorably toward morning. I replayed our entire marriage in my mind the way she would sometimes linger on her phone. The weekend trips she claimed were for work friends, the odd absences at family gatherings. Every innocent moment now seemed loaded with hidden meaning, a carefully constructed facade to keep me blind. I began to notice things in the apartment I hadn't before. Subtle changes, her side of the closet slightly different. Small receipts tucked into drawers that didn't make sense. It was as if I were seeing our entire life through a new lens, one tainted by suspicion and heartbreak. I felt betrayed not just by her, but by my own trust, my own inability to see the signs. The breaking point wasn't just discovering. The secretary was realizing that everything I had believed about us, about love, about our life together, had been a lie. And the truth, it cut sharper than anything I'd ever felt. I would have given anything to rewind time, to see what I had missed, to stop this before it started. But there was no going back. The cracks were too deep. I think the most painful part was the normalcy of it all. She didn't have to be sneaky in a dramatic, obvious way. She didn't have to leave a trail of destruction in the middle of the living room. It was subtle, insidious, carefully measured. And that's what made it worse. I had been blind, complacent, trusting someone I thought I knew, and she had used that trust effortlessly to live a life I wasn't a part of. Over the following days, I became obsessive. Every notification, every email, every little detail became a point of evidence. I started cross-referencing her stories with the messages I was finding. The discrepancies were endless. What had seemed like minor fibs or forgetfulness now screamed betrayal. I could feel my mental state fraying. Sleep became impossible, meals tasteless. I found myself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., mind racing, heart pounding. Trying to make sense of a world that no longer felt real, I began replaying moments that I had cherished. Like our first anniversary dinner at that Italian place in downtown Austin, our laughter. The candlelight, the way she'd looked at me like I was everything. And then I would see it through this new lens, the little glances at her phone under the table, the slightly distracted tone in her voice. It was like watching home videos of a life I had loved. But realizing all the smiles had been lies, I couldn't bring myself to confront her further without proof. Not that it mattered, proof existed everywhere if I looked hard enough. Every message, every late-night call, every dinner she claimed was team bonding was a thread in this tapestry of betrayal. I had to know everything. I had to see how deep the deception went, because my mind wouldn't let me live in uncertainty any longer. Then came the moment that shattered the last piece of my fragile world. I found her hidden phone, the one she kept tucked away under her pillow, carefully charged and always locked. I had hesitated for weeks, knowing that this would cross a line. I had promised myself I wouldn't. But desperation has a way of breaking principles. My hands trembled as I picked it up, remembering every late-night suspicion, every whisper of doubt. Unlocking it felt like opening a tomb. Messages, photos, notes, all carefully curated to keep me in the dark. And then I saw it. Her interactions with him, the man she had called a coworker, laid bare in all their intimacy. Flirtation, affection, shared secrets, laughter, inside jokes. Not just a phone call here or there, this was a parallel life she had been living for months, if not years. I remember sinking to the floor, the phone slipping from my fingers as my chest tightened. My vision blurred with tears I couldn't control. It was at that moment, sitting on the hardwood floor of our apartment, the city quiet outside, that the truth hit me fully. My marriage, the life I had believed in, the woman I had trusted with every part of me, had been a lie. And worse, I realized, I had no idea who she really was anymore. The following days were a blur of confrontation, arguments, silence, and unbearable tension. Emily tried to explain, to justify, to cry, to beg, to say it wasn't what I thought. But the damage was done. Trust, once fractured, can't simply be repaired with words. Every attempt at explanation felt like another betrayal. Every tear, another reminder of the life I thought I had lost. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment everything changed. Not just when I saw the messages, but when I understood that love alone isn't enough. That trust is fragile, and once broken, it can splinter into pieces too small to ever truly put back together. I felt hollow, unmoored, like the ground beneath me had vanished. The world continued to move, cars honking outside. Neighbors talking through the walls, the microwave beeping but for me. Time had stopped, trapped in a moment of raw, unfiltered heartbreak. And so that was the breaking point. The night I discovered her secret life, the moment I realized I didn't know the woman I had married. The instant my heart shattered into pieces I wasn't sure could ever be reassembled. The months that followed would test me in ways I hadn't imagined, emotionally, mentally, and morally. But the seed had been planted, and the unraveling had begun. The days after discovering Emily's secret felt like walking through fog. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was disorientation. It's like I had been yanked out of the world I knew and dropped into one where every familiar sound, every routine, every memory carried a sting. Austin felt different. The streets narrower, the autumn wind sharper. The smell of rain on concrete almost mocking in its normalcy. People went on with their lives, laughing in cafes, walking dogs in the park, completely oblivious to the chaos consuming me from within. I tried to keep going to work, but it felt hollow. My coding, my meetings, even the emails I sent felt like mechanical motions. I would sit at my desk staring at lines of code I once loved, my mind fixating on messages I had no right to read yet couldn't stop thinking about. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep. At night I would lie in our bed listening to the faint hum of Emily moving in the apartment, imagining conversations I wasn't part of, remembering the laughs I had once thought were mine. Family and friends noticed the change immediately. My sister Megan, who lives in Houston, called me almost daily. She would ask if I was okay, gently, almost cautiously, as if afraid she'd touch a wound that hadn't fully scabbed over. I tried to brush it off, said I was tired, stressed from work, but the truth is, I couldn't find the words. How do you explain that the person you trusted most has been living a double life right under your nose? How do you explain that? Someone you loved with every fiber of your being had been lying to you for months. Emily, meanwhile, tried to act normal, but the tension between us was like a living, breathing entity. The apartment itself seemed to close in on me. Her presence was both a comfort and a torment. He wanted her, near and far at the same time. I would watch her from the kitchen as she made coffee in the morning, feeling a strange, twisted longing for the woman I thought I knew. And then the anger would hit, hot and uncontrollable, and I would retreat to the living room, pretending to work while silently counting the seconds until she went to bed. I couldn't even confide in friends fully. Most people have no reference for this kind of betrayal. It's not like losing a job or moving cities. This was private, intimate, a wound hidden in the folds of daily life. I would half-heartedly mention trust issues or say I was dealing with relationship stress, but the words didn't carry the gravity of what I felt. Some days I wondered if anyone could truly understand. I started noticing changes in Emily, too. She became overly careful, almost robotic in her interactions with me. Her laugh, once so natural, now felt measured, cautious. She would avoid eye contact, her eyes flitting to her phone whenever it buzzed. I caught her once trying to hide a notification, a reflex so subtle it nearly went unnoticed. But I saw it. I always saw it, and every time I did, it was like twisting the knife a little deeper. The emotional toll began affecting other areas of my life. Work, which I had always loved, became impossible to focus on. I would zone out in meetings, thinking about who she was texting at that moment, where she was going, what she was saying. My sleep schedule collapsed entirely. I would lie awake until 3 or 4 a.m., staring at the ceiling, mind racing through every memory, every message, every lie. When I finally fell asleep, it was never deep, never restorative. I woke up exhausted, even though the night had been long. I also began questioning myself, my instincts, my judgment. Had I missed the signs? Was I too naive? Too trusting? Too in love? I replayed every conversation, every interaction, every joke, and every late night at the office she had mentioned. Slowly, painfully, I started to notice the inconsistencies. The subtle shifts in tone, the small contradictions, the tiny gaps in her timeline. My own mind became a tool of torture, piecing together evidence I wish I had never seen. Then came the moments with strangers. The inadvertent reminders of what had been lost. I would see couples walking hand in hand, laugh over inside jokes I would never be part of again, or spot a couple in a cafe, talking quietly. And I would imagine it was them, imagining the same conversations I had once thought were unique to Emily and me. Every glance at happy strangers, every ordinary scene, was another reminder of betrayal. One of the hardest moments came when we had to face family. Thanksgiving 2021 was approaching, and the pressure to appear normal weighed heavily. We were supposed to fly to my parents' place in Dallas. Emily insisted everything was fine. I tried to act the same, smile at my mom and dad, pretend I was okay. But it was impossible. Every laugh, every hug, every passing comment about our life together felt like salt in a wound that refused to heal. My parents noticed. Of course they're not oblivious, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. How do you explain that the woman you married, the mother of your dreams, has been living a parallel life that you were never meant to see? Even my own emotions were a battlefield. I would vacillate between rage, grief, and longing within the span of an hour. I loved her, still in fragments. In moments when my mind tricked me into remembering the old Emily, the one who could fill a room with her laugh, the one who held my hand during stressful days, the one who promised forever. But then reality would slam back in. The Emily I loved was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't trust. Someone who had shattered the world we built together. Work became unbearable too. I started calling in sick more often, citing vague headaches and stress. My team noticed. I wasn't performing, couldn't concentrate, and found myself snapping at colleagues over trivial things. Once I nearly walked out of a meeting mid-discussion because a coworker mentioned their spouse. Every mundane reference to love, trust, or relationships became an echo of my own failure and pain. I tried therapy. I booked sessions with a counselor, hoping for some clarity, some relief, but it was messy. Sitting there, recounting every detail, every suspicion, every revelation, brought it all back fresh. Every time. My therapist would nod. Offer words like validate your feelings and focus on your own well-being, but the words felt hollow against the magnitude of what I had lost. I wanted something stronger: justice, answers, a way to make sense of the chaos. Emily and I tried to talk at length. Forced conversations where we dissected every call, every message. Every meeting she had attended, she admitted parts. Denied others, apologized profusely, cried. But apologies felt like smoke. They didn't undo the betrayal. They didn't erase the sleepless nights, the obsessive thinking, the way I began to distrust not just her, but the very foundation of relationships I had always believed in. Isolation became my refuge and my punishment. I withdrew from friends, from social events, from anything that reminded me of normal life. Even small Joyce Austen's live music scene, the faint smell of roasted coffee beans at our favorite cafe. A quiet evening watching Netflix felt tainted, colored by suspicion and grief. I was trapped in my own mind, replaying every detail over and over, searching for answers that would never fully satisfy. And then came the strange, hollow moments of clarity. Between the anger and the grief, I would catch myself imagining a future without her, a version of life where I could rebuild. But those moments were fleeting. They were overshadowed by what I still loved, by the fragments of the woman I had married, by the memories that refused to leave. I realized that heartbreak isn't just a single wave, it's a tide, pulling you under again and again, each current stronger than the last. I also began noticing the little lies she had told me, things I hadn't paid attention to before, small deviations in stories about office parties, lunch meetings, errands she supposedly ran. Every lie, tiny at first, accumulated into a mountain of deception that I couldn't ignore. And with every revelation, the trust I had once taken for granted eroded further. Friends started asking questions. "Are you okay? How are things with Emily?" And I would smile weakly, say we're working through it, while my chest tightened. No one could know the truth, not yet. The shame, the humiliation, the rawness of it all was something I had to carry alone. Even now, thinking back, I can feel the weight of it pressing down, heavy as a stone. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was practical too. Shared bills, joint accounts, leases, routines, all these things became battlegrounds. Every interaction with her carried tension. Every attempt at civility felt strained. I felt like I was living in the same apartment as a stranger, someone I had once known intimately but now could barely recognize. By December, a few weeks after the discovery, I was a shadow of myself. My work had suffered, my friendships had frayed, my nights were sleepless, and my days were punctuated by waves of grief and rage. I was caught between wanting to fix things and wanting to run, between clinging to fragments of love and cutting myself free entirely. The life I thought I had built was gone, and in its place was uncertainty, anger, heartbreak, and a gnawing need to reclaim control. And it was in that liminal space, between despair and the faint glimmer of resolve, that I realized I couldn't stay passive anymore. The fallout had been total, consuming every part of my existence. But surviving it, truly surviving it, meant making choices, taking action, and deciding what kind of life I wanted next. I didn't know what that would look like yet, but I knew I couldn't stay trapped in this fog forever. After weeks of spiraling, I hit a point where I realized I couldn't keep living as a passive observer in my own life. The betrayal had left me raw, exposed, but it had also lit something inside me, a spark I hadn't known I still had. I knew I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo what had happened, but I could control what I did next. I could reclaim myself, my dignity, and my future. And maybe, just maybe, I could confront the deception on my terms. The first step was establishing boundaries. Emily and I still lived in the same apartment, but I started carving out spaces that were mine alone. I worked late at the office whenever I could, sometimes staying until 9 or 10 p.m. just to have breathing room. I moved my workspace to the far corner of the living room, arranging it in a way that allowed me to feel some control over the environment. I installed a small safe, not to hide anything from her, but to protect my own private documents and personal files. Every small action felt like a tiny reclaiming of my life, a counterbalance to the chaos her betrayal had unleashed. I also started documenting everything. I created spreadsheets, meticulously tracking late-night calls, messages, and suspicious patterns. I printed emails, took screenshots, and stored them securely. Part of it wasn't just about proof, it was about taking back a sense of agency. When I felt powerless before, now, I had evidence, data and facts that reminded me I was no longer blind. Knowledge, in its own way, was empowering, emotionally. The turning point came in the form of therapy and self-reflection. I committed to daily journaling, pouring every raw, unfiltered thought onto paper. I didn't hold back. I wrote about the anger, the heartbreak, the humiliation, the tiny moments of hope that refused to die. I even wrote letters to Emelina to send them, but to give myself a voice, a way to process emotions without confrontation. Writing became my lifeline, a way to untangle the knot of grief and rage in my mind. But the real transformation started when I began. Confronting reality rather than hiding from it. I had to face the truth. Emily had made choices, and I had been betrayed. There was no undoing it, and no amount of denial would help. I began asking myself hard questions. What do I want now? What am I willing to forgive, if anything? And most importantly, how do I move forward without losing myself in the wreckage? It wasn't easy. The first confrontation after my documentation was terrifying. I laid out everything I had found, from emails to call logs to the inconsistencies in her stories. I wanted to hear her explanation, not because I thought it would heal the pain, but because I needed her to understand that I had seen through the deception. Her reaction was a mix of denial, guilt, and panic, but I had prepared myself. I stayed calm, almost detached, as I recounted the facts. There was no shouting, no tears, just clarity, and a strange sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in months. The aftermath of that confrontation was transformative. Emily tried to justify, rationalize, and plead, but I realized that reconciliation wasn't my immediate goal. My goal was clarity, autonomy, and emotional survival. I had spent months feeling like a ghost in my own life. Now, I was reclaiming my presence. The sense of control, of agency, even in such a painful situation, was liberating. At work, I channeled my energy into productivity. I threw myself into projects, often staying late not just for space from Emily, but because I needed to feel capable again. My colleagues noticed a subtle change, not the old distracted, haunted version of me, but someone sharper, more focused, almost ruthless in their dedication. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them. I was proving it to myself. I could still function, still excel, even after everything had fallen apart. Socially, I began rebuilding too. I reached out to old friends I had neglected during the months of emotional collapse. I joined a local running group and started jogging in the mornings before work. The crisp Austin air and early sunlight giving me a strange clarity and energy I hadn't felt in ages. Each mile felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a silent affirmation that I was still capable of living, laughing, and moving forward. The emotional transformation wasn't instantaneous. There were setbacks, moments when I caught Emily's glance and felt a pang of old attachment. Nights when the loneliness and betrayal came crashing back like a tidal wave. But each time, I reminded myself that survival didn't mean erasing pain. It meant navigating it, understanding it, and making it fuel growth rather than destruction. Then came the more morally complex decisions. I had to decide whether to expose the full extent of her betrayal, both for my own sense of justice and for any future potential consequences. I debated for weeks. Part of me wanted to warn mutual friends, to reveal her duplicity, to make her face the consequences publicly. Another part of me knew that doing so would compromise my integrity, drag me into petty revenge, and perhaps give her power over my emotional state once again. In the end, I chose a path that felt balanced, firm, but measured. I confronted her with the intention of honesty and boundaries, and made it clear that our marriage could not continue in its current state. I didn't seek to humiliate. I sought to protect myself. I insisted on transparency moving forward, shared schedules, open communication, and strict honesty. Whether this would save the marriage was uncertain, but at least I was reclaiming my voice. Financially and logistically, I began to prepare for independence. I consolidated my accounts, separated shared finances, and even started looking at new apartments. Each step was a declaration. I would no longer be trapped in a life dictated by her choices. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I wanted freedom, clarity, and a life I could trust again. One of the most important parts of turning things around was reconnecting with myself. I had lost parts of me in the marriage, the hobbies, the routines, the passions that had once defined who I was outside of us. I picked up old habits, reading novels I had shelved for years, learning guitar, and even taking short solo trips around Texas. Each experience reminded me that I could still find joy and meaning on my own. The betrayal had fractured my world, but it couldn't erase my capacity to grow and heal. There were moments of catharsis, too. I remember one evening in late February 2022, sitting alone in our empty apartment. Emily was out, the city quiet around me. I took out a notebook and wrote a letter to her, not to send, but to release every ounce of hurt, anger, and grief. I wrote about the nights I lay awake, about the lies I uncovered, about the emotional wreckage I had endured. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, almost unrecognizable. The act wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. It was me taking ownership of my emotions instead of letting them control me. Slowly, piece by piece, I began rebuilding not just my life, but my sense of self. I started dating casually again, cautiously, aware of the scars, but also aware that I deserved companionship built on honesty. I repaired friendships that had strained under the weight of my obsession and isolation. I immersed myself in work projects, earning recognition and satisfaction not because I needed validation from anyone, but because I had rediscovered my competence and confidence, and through all of this, I realized something crucial. Turning the tables wasn't about punishing Emily. It wasn't about exposing her or making her feel the pain I had felt. It was about me, about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. The betrayal was hers. The recovery was mine. And in that reclamation, I found a sense of power I hadn't known before, a quiet, steady strength that didn't depend on anyone else's choices. By mid-2022, the dynamic in our relationship had shifted completely. Emily, to her credit, complied with the boundaries I had set, but the trust was gone. Our interactions were polite, functional, but emotionally distant. I had built walls not to punish, but to protect. And behind those walls, I had found myself again, a version of me that could breathe, think, and even laugh without fear of deception lurking just out of sight. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't without cost. Nights of doubt and pangs of old affection still came, and sometimes I wondered if I had made the right choices. But each time, I reminded myself that healing is messy, uneven, and deeply personal. It isn't about erasing pain. It's about learning to live with it while still moving forward. In hindsight, I can see that the turning point, the moment when I chose to take action rather than be a passive victim, was the most important part of this journey. Betrayal had knocked me down, shattered my assumptions, and left me raw. But it also forced me to confront myself, to reassess my boundaries, to reclaim control. And in doing so, I discovered something I hadn't realized I'd lost: the ability to trust myself again, to navigate life on my own terms, and to find strength in the aftermath of heartbreak. By the time the leaves had fully turned golden in Austin that fall, I had started to feel something I hadn't felt in months: a quiet sense of peace. Not joy, not complete happiness, but a fragile, precious calm that whispered to me that life, despite everything, could still be lived fully. Betrayal had left scars, deep ones, but I had learned to carry them without letting them define me. I had survived, and in surviving, I had grown. Emily and I were still in the apartment, bound by leases, shared belongings, and the remnants of a life that was once ours. But the emotional space between us had widened into something almost tangible: a boundary, a buffer, a protective layer. Our interactions were polite, efficient, and careful. She no longer had the power to unsettle me with secretive glances or hushed tones. I had reclaimed my agency, and in that reclamation, I realized I could finally breathe again. It wasn't easy. Some nights I would lie awake and feel the old pain resurface. I would remember the laughter we shared on our first anniversary, the late-night drives through empty city streets, the quiet Sunday mornings drinking coffee together. Those memories were bittersweet. They reminded me of what I had loved, but also of what had been lost. But rather than allowing them to consume me, I began to treat them as lessons. They were reminders that love, trust, and intimacy are precious and that betrayal doesn't erase the capacity to love again. I had also learned to trust myself again. For months, after discovering her secret, I questioned everything: my judgment, my instincts, even my capacity to read people. But slowly, as I rebuilt routines, set boundaries, and reclaimed my life, I began to see that I could trust myself again. I could recognize red flags, prioritize my emotional health, and make decisions that honored my well-being. That self-trust became the cornerstone of my recovery. The foundation on which I could rebuild a meaningful life. Work had become a refuge, a place where I could excel without the weight of personal betrayal hanging over me. I threw myself into projects, but not as a means of escape instead. It was a conscious choice to invest in something tangible, something I could control. Recognition came, slowly but surely, and with it, a subtle confidence I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I could survive devastation and still create value in the world. Social life returned in a different form. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the months of obsession and isolation. I began dating cautiously, aware of my scars, but also aware that love could exist again if approached carefully. I learned to appreciate companionship not as a necessity to fill a void, but as a shared journey between two honest, consenting adults. The first date I had after months of emotional rebuilding felt surreal, nervous, hopeful, tentative, but it was also a reminder that life could surprise me. That joy could still exist even after profound betrayal. One day, months later, Emily and I had what I would call the final conversation. She had asked to talk, seemingly seeking closure, but I realized that I no longer needed hers. I listened to her explanation, the story of her mistakes, the justifications, the apologies. I nodded, acknowledged her words, but I didn't feel the old turmoil. I felt clarity. I had processed the betrayal, faced it, and made peace with my decisions. I didn't hate her, not completely. I just recognized that the person I had loved was no longer the person in front of me. The attachment was gone, replaced by a sense of finality and acceptance. Leaving that conversation, I felt lighter than I had in months. There was no dramatic, cathartic moment of revenge or vindication. Instead, there was a quiet, profound realization. Life goes on. Betrayal doesn't define you unless you let it. Pain doesn't own you unless you surrender. And the choices you make in the aftermath, how you respond, how you rebuild, how you carry yourself forward, can turn devastation into resilience. By the end of the year, I'd moved into a new apartment, a small place in East Austin with sunlight streaming through large windows and a quiet balcony overlooking the street. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, and it felt like freedom. I had started cultivating hobbies I had abandoned: morning runs, guitar lessons, reading novels that had been gathering dust on my shelves. Every small act was a testament to survival, a quiet declaration that I was not defined by betrayal, but by my response to it. Looking back, I see that the ordeal changed me profoundly. I became more cautious, yes, but also more empathetic. I learned to value honesty, transparency, and emotional integrity, not just in others, but in myself. I discovered that love is fragile, trust is sacred, resilience is something you build with patience, reflection, and courage. Most importantly, I realized that self-respect is non-negotiable, and that reclaiming your life after betrayal requires intention, strength, an unwavering commitment to your own well-being. There were lessons, too, about forgiveness, not in the sense of absolving the other person of wrongdoing, but in the sense of releasing the grip of anger and resentment on your own life. I forgave her in small increments, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Holding on to anger would have kept me trapped in the wreckage. Letting go allowed me to move forward fully and authentically. Even now, nearly 2 years later, the memories linger. I remember the late-night calls, the secret messages, the hollow laughter that once filled our apartment, but they no longer have the power to control me. They are reminders of how far I've come, markers on the path from betrayal to self-reclamation. I have rebuilt a life that is mine, and in doing so, I have discovered an inner strength I didn't know existed. The final, and perhaps most important, realization came quietly one morning in early March 2023. I was sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up, feeling the sunlight warm my face. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt genuinely content. Not everything was perfect. Some scars would never fully fade. But I had survived. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and disillusionment. I had emerged on the other side with dignity intact. I had chosen action over passivity, clarity over confusion, and life over despair. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Betrayal can shatter trust, but it cannot destroy you unless you allow it to. Pain can consume you, but it can also teach you resilience, self-awareness, and strength. And heartbreak, as excruciating as it is, can be the catalyst that pushes you toward becoming a version of yourself you might never have discovered. Una Shreth, no longer live in fear of being deceived again. I no longer let past betrayal define my worth. I am cautious, yes, but I am also hopeful. I am guarded, but I am also open to friendship, to love, to life. The experience reshaped me, not into someone bitter or broken, but into someone wiser, stronger, and more attuned to the importance of integrity, both in myself and in those I choose to share my life with. In the end, the truth that shattered my marriage didn't destroy MIT, became the crucible through which I forged a new version of myself. I carry the lessons with me every day. The fragility of trust, importance of boundaries, and the unassailable strength of self-respect. Betrayal marked a chapter in my life, but it did not mark the conclusion. That chapter closed with pain, yes, but also with growth, resilience, and the quiet knowledge that I had reclaimed my life, my agency, and my future, and that I realize now is the most powerful resolution of all, not revenge. Not reconciliation, but reclaiming your life, piece by piece, and discovering that the person you were before betrayal is still there, stronger and more alive than ever.